Well, this is going to be a fun conversation. I was introduced to Tony Michaelides via LinkedIn by Dennis Pitoko. And once you hear some of his stories, you'll understand why I was intrigued when I looked at his profile after that introduction. Tony, thank you so much for joining me on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me, Sarah.
Absolutely. So I always start with the question, can you tell me something about yourself that most people might not know about you? And the reason I ask this question is that I love for our listeners to get kind of a different view, a more, I guess, multi-dimensional view of who you are, starting at the very beginning. So what do you think? Do you have something you could share with us?
Is that like a brief kind of where I came from type thing? Because my story, if you like, in a nutshell, is working with people whose records I'd bought as a kid. So the fantasy side of that, to me, still to this day, as I'm an elder statesman, is that doesn't happen to a kid from the north of England, because careers officers don't come to school and teach you about things like that. It's not kind of the real world. And to have a job that's an extension of your hobby, I always feel, for want of a better word, honored. But what would people not know about me? That's a difficult one, really, because I have a big mouth and I talk about everything. So people who don't know me probably know more than they should.
Well, what about something that happened in your childhood that you listened to a particular musician and decided, this is it. I'm working with this guy sometime in my future?
Well, I've had a lot of, I've been doing a lot of podcasts and interviews, radio and TV things of late, because I have a new book out, Moments That Rock, so you get the standard questions, what's David Bowie like and things. But somebody asked me a really interesting question the other day. And there's a story in my book about meeting Led Zeppelin when I was 15, So all the same kids that went to the same school and bought the same records didn't get to go backstage like I did, And to have that happen to you when you kind of meet your heroes is something I never lost sight of, And the guy asked me the question. He said, what do you think the music industry taught you in all those years that might have helped you as a 15-year-old, getting to meet Led Zeppelin? And I kind of smiled in a way to say that good question. And I said, well, strange as it sounds, not a huge amount, really, because when I say I come from a different world, I mean, I kind of look at things like diversity and all the boring things that are happening in the world today. And to do things like this, where you bring a little bit of inspiration and happiness, is really important to me, like it is to you. And I said, but when I was kind of 6, for instance, I realized, like, on the school playground, that I didn't want to hang out with this jerk, this 6-year-old who was a bully. So that was kind of like, because they don't teach you interpersonal skills at school, they teach you geography and maths and, stuff like that. And then the other thing is, when I was in my teens and I discovered girls, and I had to stand in front of them and ask them out, not like swipe right, swipe left, and fear rejection, and think, oh my God, if she says no, would I ever ask another girl out again? So, to just brief that down a little, it's like I kind of learn about, the things that you should learn growing up. You develop your communication skills. So I had no idea as a 6-year-old or a 15-year-old, for that matter, that I was going to end up working in an industry that involved the ability to communicate with people. So I had kind of, a real world experience, if you like, that I wasn't kind of trying to find out. But I always look back on that and I feel that was a great kind of learning curve, So when I had to get in front of people to make them aware of the records and the artists that I was promoting, I think I had communication skills that I developed early. So that's probably, that might be something people don't know.
That's kind of unusual. When I think about a 6-year-old figuring these things out, I would say that most 6-year-olds aren't that aware of figuring things out. So maybe this was something about you that was unique, was that even at 6 and at 15, you were realizing that you were gaining skills. I know that that's not how I was thinking about it. So maybe that's what it is that early on. And the reason I say that is some people can look back and say, I knew then what I was going to do. And maybe this was part of your, I knew then I was learning these skills, because I interviewed Duke Robillard many years ago. He was one of my first interviews on this podcast. Phenomenal blues musician. He's in his 70s now, still putting out great music, still working with people like Madeline Peru, and started Roomful of Blues in the DC area. And he said, I knew at 6 that I was a guitar player, that I was meant to do this. And he actually went so far as to say, I think that I actually had a previous life as a guitar player, that this wasn't my first time around.
That's interesting. And I don't dispute that. But you see, in my book, I talk about wanting to play for Manchester United, which kind of every kid probably in the north of England was talking about. And then when I was kind of 15, I wanted to be a rock star. So I had dreams and aspirations. So if I was
That's not the same thing, though.
No, wait a minute. But if I was to say that I wanted to be a musician, yes, I did want to be a musician, and I got in a band. The difference being I was crap musician. So I had to kind of leave the band. I got the job because we had the biggest room to rehearse in. So my friends from school came together, good guitar player, good drummer, lousy bass player. So I learned that. So I could say I had dreams and aspirations, but I also had a reality check and thinking, maybe not.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that Duke Robillard didn't have that. Like, he just knew. And the irony is that his mom wouldn't let him play guitar. His older brother, who was significantly older than he was, had a guitar, and his mom was like, nope, I'm not letting you play the guitar. I don't want you to go into music. This would have been in the 60s, right? And he's like, nope.
Yeah, the proper job.
And he would go and sneak his brother's guitar and play on his brother's guitar. And the best part of the story was that for the science fair, he convinced his dad to help him build an electric guitar as part of his science fair project. So that was his first real guitar that was his. So there's a difference, but it seems to me that sometimes as a kid, we know something about ourselves, even if that's not aspirational. Like my sister knew that she was a singer. Maybe not, she didn't, I don't think she had visions of grandeur, being a rock star or anything, but she knew as a little kid that she was a singer. At 3, 4, 5 years old, you would ask her what she was, and she would say a singer. And it was never a professional goal necessarily. But there are some things you just innately know about yourself, I think.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I just disagree with you about me because if I just ended that bit to say, when I'd left school, I went to further education college in England, which was perfect for people like me who were done with school but not quite ready for work. So I went to a college and I did a course in business studies, and it's the least of my skills. So then I wanted to kind of think I was going to be a lawyer. And then it was time to leave college, and I got like a lousy job. And I sat in an office next to a guy who was counting down the hours from a Monday morning to go to the pub on a Friday night. So there was nothing motivating or inspiring me. And I actually picked up a coffee with the local paper going home, and I looked at the classified ads, which I never do. And there was a job for a sales representative for a label called Transatlantic. And I kind of went home and I thought about it and, this and that. And I went to work and I started gazing out the window. And I went into the local HMV catalog, and it was folk and jazz, which I was buying Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple records. So I knew nothing about it. But all my friends who had the same paper, who read the same papers and things like that, could all have applied for that job. I'm not saying that I'm any better than them, but when they got proper jobs, lawyers, accountants, bank managers, whatever, I went for a job. And there's no qualifications for something like that. Being a fan isn't a qualification. But I thought, I don't have a job in the music industry. If I don't get it, I still don't have a job in the music industry. So nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I didn't get it. And they employed some clown who fell off a hill and phoned me back like 6 months later. The story's endless, don't worry. And I did get that job. Then all of a sudden I'm kind of 20 years old and I'm in the music business. And that was kind of like a wow moment. That really, even all these years later, I go back and I can remember that first day. So that was kind of.
What was the first day like? Let's hear it.
The first day was amazing. You see, you got to remember that the music industry then was run by music people. People who really shaped what we're listening to today. Not accountants and lawyers who kind of run it now about market share, and they don't develop artists in the way that they did. I forgot your question. What was it?
That first day. I want to hear about your first day.
The first day was just like, it's really interesting because when I started my own company and employing people, I never employed anybody who had ever worked for a record company. I just employed people that I thought had that certain something. And I gave them one piece of advice. I said, whatever you screw up on, I'll pull you out of. And it reminded me of my first day because I was 20 years old. I was selling records to major outlets in major cities, vans off out the back of a van. But you know what, Sarah? I went out every single day to prove to that guy who'd employed me that it was the best decision he'd ever made, giving me a job. And I think subconsciously, I might have tried to instill that into people working for me, giving them the confidence of thinking, hey, you might screw up on something, but you won't get sacked.
Right.
You learn from it. And, I came from a generation of people that made it up as we went along. There were no music schools and, people profess real world education. But I don't subscribe to that in music. I think your real world education, listen, you don't learn how to drive a car until you pass your test. You learn what you need to do, but it's not until you get out on the road that you really know what to do.
Right. So you're in the van. Did you have to go pick up the van? Was it like at a different location? And who greeted you?
No, I went to London on the train to pick up the van and drive it home.
What was that like?
It was exciting because I was like, I had this big, it was a big van. It was like, it's an old Mercedes van with like 7,000 albums on it.
Right.
And I was driving that back. If in those days, if there were iPhones and things, I probably would have videoed my journey home because I would have come home and looked at this big daft grin on my face, because
Yes.
like I say, I couldn't wait to get started. And when I did, it was kind of like, I wouldn't say I went out with fever pitch excitement, but I was raring to go, for want of a better word.
You were. I want to go back though. I want to go back. That couldn't have been your first day. You had to go to London and learn what you were supposed to do, right? Before you picked up the van? Who talked to you?
Well, you're talking to me like I had a proper job. There was no real sale. The sales manager, a guy called Ray Cooper, came up to Manchester to kind of interview me. But I won't go into it. I explained the interview in my book, it was more like a kind of an initiation, like you get in the Hells Angels, We went in this dodgy topless bar and he was spitting out this sandwich at me. Do you fancy the gig, man? We're talking 1974 here. We're talking like a different time.
Well, that's why I wanted to hear
then
it.
And that was kind of on a Wednesday, I think. And then I started like on the Monday. In between, I went down to pick my van up, came back. All the stock was in it from the warehouse. And I just had a list of calls to go to. So I went to like my first shop. And the first thing I was doing was walking in and introducing myself to the buyer, letting them know that I was the new kid on the block, so to speak. And yeah, I mean, I don't have like, this kind of video evidence and stuff you'd have nowadays because everybody films everything. But I probably, if I was to, go back and think about it, I probably had an inane smile on my face where, I was just loving the thought of doing what I was doing. But I was also loving the thought of meeting new people and, finding out like, what store preferred what type of music and things like that. Because I think if you're kind of totally awake to the possibilities of keeping this job as much as anything, you look at every aspect of it, and it's the whole thing is, and when I moved into PR, all my entire career has been about relationship building, So I used to say people didn't play my records because they liked me. They listened to them because they respected me. So I can't think of a day that I went to work and, I never had that, oh God, it's Monday tomorrow or anything like that. I always had like real enthusiasm. I think that relates with people. They can see that you're enjoying themselves. So you're not doing it for the money. Well, I wasn't doing it for the money. It was hardly anything back then.
Right. Well, I would agree with that. And that is a perfect segue into the whole theme that I've been working through over the past few episodes of this podcast, which is around identity, authenticity, and relevance. And I love what you're saying about just knowing that you were excited for this, for those two reasons, that it was music, which you already had a love for, but it was also relationship building. So when you think about writing your book and what you're doing next, how do you embrace those things in your work now because you're not doing what you were doing before?
Well, the interesting thing, Sarah, is like, yes, I'm not doing what I did then. But to be honest, the reason I'm here, I've been in America 18 years. And the reason I came here was the music industry was falling apart around me. And I hadn't done anything wrong, but I had a staff of like 8 or 10 people with everything that came with it, like company cars and all your telephone calls were paid for then. I mean, you had to pay for your internet. I had to pay, I think it was $80, $100 a quarter to rent like a photocopy, which you can buy for like $50 nowadays. So the overhead was quite expensive. But I kind of did my Ziggy Stardust. I kind of found myself doing what people like David Bowie did back in the day by reinventing themselves. And just coming out here. And I mean, they call it like innovative and stuff. I call it like flying by the seat of my pants, because I quite like that energy that not knowing what's around the corner comes, So, yeah, I think, hang on, I'm veering off into the abyss now. Bring me back.
No, it's working. It's working. So
Be
when
gentle
you think
with
about, well, you've expressed that the meaning in your work, the thing that really resonates with you in your work and has for your entire career so far is building relationships and being in the industry, being around music because it's so important to you. So how are you finding meaning and relevance in your work now? I mean, I'm sure it has a lot to do with writing that book and publishing it, but what else are you doing? And let me give you some context for this. Just there are a lot of us that we put so much of our identity in the work we do that we forget that we bring so much more to our work than we do to one particular job. Do you see what I mean? Like our identity doesn't need to be wrapped up in a title or in a place that we're sitting. It has to be in what we bring to wherever we sit, that purpose. So what are you doing now? Because I know our listeners are curious about maybe inspiring them for ideas of what they can do to make sure they're continuing to build meaning and relevance in their lives.
Well, that's a good question, because the thing is, it's like people ask me if I miss my job. I said, well, what is there to miss? My job doesn't exist today, because, we had to phone round radio stations and find out what they were playing. We didn't click a button and everything would be downloaded, and then we just sent it off to the record companies and the managers to let them know. I mean, that's not being tested and everything. But the thing is, like, listen, nothing lasts forever. If you're in your 40s and you're a footballer, you're not going to play at that level again. And I'd work with, artists of the caliber of, Bob Marley, The Police, Genesis, David Bowie, U2. And pretentious as it sounded, I kind of supposed I wanted to leave my legacy in place. So I couldn't do what I did. But the thing is, I came here and I'd done a radio show back in the UK for 12 and a half years. And I loved that because it was a great opportunity to turn people on to music that I had access to that they didn't. So, I had 70,000 people in the northwest of England listening to me and stuff. And the other thing is, when I went out, when I came here and stuff, it took a little while. I worked for a music think tank to start with. That didn't work, but, the thing is, I come from an industry where you walk the walk and talk the talk. And if somebody tells me something, I believe they can do it. So I work with people that the problem is, Sarah, is that when you work in an industry like this, kind of people get excited and all of a sudden they start, trying to impress you. And they know people who've worked at a record company. They know bands. They know this. And, I without being pretentious, I've dined with rock royalty. I don't have people like David Bowie sitting in front of me trying to impress me. And I feel like saying, just be normal, So the thing is, when I certainly now more than like my first half of being here, I write and talk about it. So I have a podcast called Moments That Rock. I mean, I've even kind of branded myself because, in my podcast, I interview artists and music industry insiders and I have them share their stories. And it's great because my practice is the same as you're doing with your podcast. If you like to listen to what you're digesting at your end, then why shouldn't your listeners, So I do a podcast. This is my second book. I do speaking. And really, I'm trying to kind of there's a generation growing up that haven't had it to miss it, you know. So if I share stories, I have a my next project is going to be a series of ebooks and audiobooks called Lessons Learned from Rock and Roll. And to give you a classic example, you know, I mean, the new rock stars are like developers. So if you equate something to somebody that everybody's heard of, and in this case, Bruce Springsteen. So how come Mr. Developer, Mr. New Rock Star, do you leave your job every 2 years? Have you heard about this guy who they call the boss? Well, guess what? He's had the same staff for over 40 years. The only two that have left have died. How come he manages to retain his staff and you people don't? You just move on. So it's a great lesson for the corporate American, wherever, about retention, you know. But because it involves a guy everybody's heard of, they listen to it differently. And when you talk about, you know, the likes of an icon like David Bowie, whose legacy will remain forever. I mean, he saw the internet coming before any label. And the thing with an artist like that was he was constantly evolving. Now, when I was growing up doing my job, I was managing creativity every day of my life. But the thing is, it wasn't in the dictionary. If you have like business school now, innovative management and managing creativity, they're two buzz topics. But I kind of grew up with all that around me. And I just wanted to go back 1 second to those words that kind of really energized me, like authenticity. I mean, I was party to a company that did a survey of 30,000 millennials from all over the world a few years ago. And the two things they look for are authenticity. And the second thing is it has to come from a reliable source, right? Well, the reliable source bit is if somebody hears me on here and they've never heard of me or anything, and they get curious and they find out and they like what I'm doing and they share that with their people on social networks and stuff like that, then, you know, they will accept me because the reliable source is their friend. So, but you know what? There's not that much difference in me going out as a 15-year-old, getting a train to Manchester on a Saturday with my pocket money, buying an album, coming home and couldn't wait to get round to my friend's house to turn it on to them. But I found it, so I have the bragging rights. Do you know what I mean? So the authenticity, okay. And that's what I mean about working things out now that kind of makes so much sense. And I think the authenticity thing, which becomes like, because millennials get like you know, a really bad press, you know, about Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, they have Siri to tell them everything. So what do they need me for? But the interesting thing is that you know, I used to say to people back in the day, when it comes to authenticity, I say, listen, if you think I'm the biggest jerk you've ever met, I won't let you down next time because I'm going to be exactly the same.
Yes, well, there's a consistency
and
there.
I like that. I like that in as much as you know, it applies to anything though, Sarah. I mean, like even dreadful things like abusive relationships. If somebody's hit you, they will hit you again. Might be tomorrow, might be next week, might be next year, might be in 5 years, but it'll happen again. Because, you know, I'm a great believer in first impressions count. You know, you always remember people the first time you met them. So what you're saying
is
I'm very comfortable in that.
So what you're saying is that authenticity is consistency of personality or consistency of behavior?
Well, I think it's I'm privileged in a way to think that I didn't have to work on it because, you know, I want people to be honest and truthful with me. It's been it's been to my detriment at times because people have told me they can do something and they can't. Instead of like being honest enough, I sit around waiting for something to happen with, you know, going into it because what was then you just move on. But I like people to, you know, I mean, I met a guy last night. I went to this entrepreneur social club, a local event they have every Thursday. And this guy was making like videos that were surreal, really. But his actual introduction was he was a musician, but he was a musician that was trying to take music in a different way. And I was honest enough to say, listen, I don't know what all the buttons on my iPhone do. I'm not really the person to help you, you know. So instead of leading him up the path and not being able to help him on anything, I was said, well, I'll take a look at what you're doing, but I don't profess to understand it. And that's not making me thick. That's just making me honest.
No, I think there's like this interesting dynamic here between honesty and authenticity. And I think they're really different things because if authentic is something that's consistent, where do we explore? How do we grow as where is our personal growth and transformation if authenticity is defined as being something consistent, as opposed to being honest, which consistently honest is one thing, I think there's an important distinction there, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe I didn't kind of relay it in the best way to understand. I mean, when authenticity for me is kind of turning up and being who you are, rather than trying to be something to impress people. And I think, if it's contrived in any way or anything, then, people would see through that. So I just take it or leave it. I am the easiest to work with because they realize it's not all about them. It's about a team of them, because that's the only way I can be, by being comfortable in my own skin. I'm not trying to, I'm trying to get to people to tell them what I'm doing, but I'm not trying to impress them or anything. So I think the two overlap. There's got to be a certain amount of honesty and authenticity, hasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Totally agree with that. And I guess the thing that always comes to my mind is this idea that authenticity has to come from the person who's doing it, as opposed to some external force. Like I can't tell you what's authentic and what's not for you. I can see through somebody trying to bullshit me.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they're being inauthentic, that they may be authentically a bullshitter. I mean,
well, yeah,
I can't tell them they're not being authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But the thing is, even in the job that I did for all those years, it's kind of like you kind of sense the ones that have got an opportunity to make it and the ones who haven't, because the ones who just have a little bit of overnight success, the assholes, for want of a better word, they're the ones that give you the runaround. They think they're rock stars, and the ones that are kind of are the real deal are the authentic ones, who just have a confidence and belief in the ability to communicate what they're doing to others. And therefore they establish a following. I mean, it's weird because you look at all things that happen now, and it was so much harder back in the day to get to people. I mean, I always say, like, you get somebody like Bono that, when U2 were playing, like in the early days, I saw him play to like 11 people. They came out after the gig to meet every single person that wanted to meet them. So they become like real in that person's world. Could you imagine Bono going back to a hotel room, or even sitting in a van driving to another gig and contacting, getting like 50 fans in Japan, going to bed and waking up and having 500? We have a different,
I can imagine.
Influencer is a different word now. Yeah. Yeah.
I
mean, influencer
imagine.
to me is well, it's hard because I don't want to be like sounding like this boring old man, but the word influencer, no disrespect, and it's not sexist or anything, but it's not a 12-year-old girl jumping out up and down on a bed, putting makeup on and things. I mean, I think that can go the other way, because you have those girls that struggle with not being as pretty as this girl.
Tony, I think,
and she becomes an influencer, and they have a mental issue problem.
And I think the important thing here to remember is that they may be an influencer, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good influence, because anyone who influences others and gets people to listen to them, even if they're crap, they're still an influencer, but it's definitely not a positive influence. And I think that's where we get kind of wrapped around the spoke, is this whole idea of wanting to influence for the wrong reasons. Like, why are we influencing? Let's take a moment and think about why we're doing something that we're doing. How do we want to be perceived later on? And the reason I go into this idea is that it kind of drives me crazy when people just do things for the sake of likes or for the sake of the word influencing, without really considering, what am I influencing? And I keep coming back to the movies of the 80s that I grew up with, because I'm in my early 50s now. And in the 80s, we had movies like Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles, where they were highly influential. And I look back now and I cringe at how much I liked that movie, 16 Candles. There's date rape in that movie, and we all thought that was okay.
Wow.
It's so I look at these things now and I'm thinking, why are we not more concerned about what we're influencing and how we're influencing?
Well, without going the political route, for obvious reasons, because we're all sick to death of that. But you see, you get people who see it as an opportunity. And I mean, I don't mind mentioning his words, Alex Young. He can go and talk for 10 years about like something like Sandy Hook, and he doesn't care about devastating people because he's making, lots of money as a result of it.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know how people like that sleep at night, and if he
Well,
goes
the
to prison
question
for the
is,
rest of his life.
good. The question is, did he ever stop to think about it?
No,
Did he ever stop to think, what is my legacy? Holy shit, I'm going to
Yeah.
die lonely.
I don't think they care. I think they're just obsessed by the fact that, and we do live in an age
power.
of,
Yeah.
so much of it reminds me of Charles Manson's era. It's like a cult. They just follow the particular people who are outrageous and full of shit. And I have no respect for those persons. They can have as many islands as they want. If they want to think that that's going to make them sleep at night, they're never going to be in my world. So,
Right.
I just feel that there are too many people that are, for want of a better word, influenced by
Exactly.
people that, and do you remember Andy Warhol's famous saying, like, everybody should be famous for 15 minutes? That's come back to haunt him. Because I worked with Simon Cowell for 7 years, so I could see those bands being manufactured and reality TV coming in and stuff. We did live in an age without the Kardashians and American Idol and everything. So much of where we are now is kind of manufactured, I think. And a lot of the things that I'm looking at from a distant perspective, and so much of it just stinks of insecurity, where people just have that burning desire to be noticed, but they don't realize for all the wrong reasons.
Right. And
take a guy like Mark
Chapman.
Chapman. Mark Chapman killed John Lennon. Everybody knows who he is now, but there's a difference between fame and notoriety,
Right.
And that's the sad thing. There are people out there that can just kind of feel that they can get recognition for doing the most disgusting things.
Right. And I've definitely seen that. So the question is, for our listeners, if you were to wrap this all up in your lessons about meaning and purpose and relevance, what would that be? Like, I know that generally the listeners of this podcast are really thinking about these things. How am I being influenced? Who am I influencing? What does my behavior say about me? And how does that affect my relationships? So if you were going to wrap this up in a nutshell based on your experiences, what would that be?
Well, a lot of it sounds like cliched, in a way, but I think, like, coming from that school of needing to sleep at night, the authentic side of things is really important, but also the fact that, be true to yourself, don't find yourself being led up a path to uncertainty just because somebody who has the ability to kind of lure you into their bizarre world. Stand back a bit and look at things. And I think as much as anything, a lot of, as you grow up, you never stop growing up, is about the people around you. And I'm really selective, even to the extent of 2 years of a pandemic has made me realize that there's some people that I haven't seen that I haven't missed. And that's not being rude. It's just being more kind of selective. I've got two kids. They're grown up. My daughter was 40 this week. My son's mid-30s. I had staff that were relying on me for getting paid to pay their rent and mortgages and stuff. So I've spent my time helping others. And there comes a time in your life where you stand back and say, hey, what about me? And that's not being selfish towards others. It's just putting yourself in the mix. So like now I'm selective in where I go and what I do. And being in control of my own destiny, for want of a better word. As we speak now, I'm about to launch my first Facebook reel, basically because I've been, nagged into it by people, because everybody tells me that, I do really well. People will love my stories and things. And I am feeling that I'm about to turn up. I've got a book. I have a responsibility. Like I said to somebody the other day, I'm not telling them to buy their book. I'm letting them know that I've got a book out. So I'm creating awareness, Now, who am I? But the weird thing about that is, after a lifetime of promoting other people, I've been not very good at promoting myself, because I kind of go the other way. Because a girl said to me the other day, she said, well, it's not bragging if you've done it, and it still kind of makes sense, really.
It is, but it's in how you tell the story. It's not bragging if you tell the story. starting with the obstacle, the challenge you face. And it's not bragging if you talk about the people who helped you along the way and who influenced you, and the fact that it didn't just come to you. So it is bragging if you're just talking about it as if you did it all by yourself. It's bragging if you're talking about it from the perspective of all your successes without including some of what went wrong.
Oh yeah, definitely. I said it, I actually mentioned that in my book. I said, everything I've ever done has never been about me. It's been about a team of people,
Exactly.
I mean, you might lead the charge as such.
When you think about someone who influenced you, just like the first person that comes to your mind, and that's not always a good, let's put it this way. I have had people who have influenced me because I have succeeded out of spite for them because they were such negative people, or, had negative experiences with me. But when you think about somebody who really influenced you, who is that person?
Oh, probably without even thinking, probably somebody like Bowie, because as an 18-year-old, I watched him split up the spiders from Mars in front of me and was really annoyed with him because I thought, well, how can you do this? How can you do this to me? Where's my next David Bowie record coming from? And then when I kind of, go through the years, so to speak, and then 25 years later, I'm having my dinner with him and arranging his promotion. I mean, that goes back to that thing I said earlier. That doesn't happen to a kid from north of England. It makes you incredibly humble and grateful for the opportunity that you had. But I don't think with a guy like that I ever stopped learning. I mean, even if you look at and I might get a little bit, rock and roll here with just identifying it as a musician and stuff. But I mean, an artist like David Bowie had one hit record in 10 years. And that was like Space Oddity, So he developed this myth of this alien rock star. And then when he turned up, he was every bit as good as he should be. So he became a superstar with Ziggy Stardust around that period. And then, but the problem with it, everything that came with it, he became a heroin addict, drinking and all that and everything. And in that school of Brian Jones, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, all dead at 27, Bowie nipped it in the bud. He broke up Ziggy Stardust, which meant that he didn't die as a 27-year-old, which they all did. He was smart enough to do that. Honestly, Sarah, who'd been waiting that long for success would kill something off in its prime? Only somebody that knew that they could move on from it. That was then, this is now. His entire career was reinventing himself. And that happens in every business nowadays. But I don't think it happened when he was doing it. And he always did it. He didn't even die till he finished his album. I mean, I could go on forever because, he actually wrote a song called Heroes, but he had, and the other thing is, I mean, even in the 70s when, Elton John and George Michael, nobody came out, especially in a country like America. It would have been the beginning of the end, But he how many kids benefited from, who were struggling with their sexuality in the 70s? From an artist like that, just not telling people if he was gay or straight, he had so much to even when he met Iman and he was with her for like 26 years and had a kid, he took time away to be a father that he didn't do first time round. He did the things that, so he meant so much to him then. And he learned so much and he never stopped learning. I mean, even a quote from him, when he was dying, I don't know where I'm going, but I know it won't be boring. I mean, those things send shivers up my back, we can be heroes if we can be heroes if just for one day. I mean, I wrote an article which USA Today printed on the second anniversary of his death. And this is the hopeless romantic in me, in as much as the first paragraph was like, there really is a star man. He did come and meet me and he did blow my mind. And that's my story. And it's even saying it, I get a lump in my throat. And it's not like, look at me, I met David Bowie. That's nothing to do with it. It's like the ability to appreciate something like 50 years later. I mean, this last month was the 50th anniversary of that album, and it's as relevant as ever. And
probably more relevant, I mean, in some ways.
That's what I'm sorry. All I was going to say to round that bit off, Sarah, was the fact that, that's what I meant about my mission, to help keep the legacy alive of some of the greatest artists that never lived. This guy can't go away because people's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren can discover that through their going into their parents' record collection. And there's nothing like music to take you back to a time and a place, and invariably with a person. I don't care if you're into sport or anything. You don't remember something from a touchdown or a goal. A song comes on, oof, We've all seen it, first-hand experience. You remember where you were, who you were with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What I'm hearing is that what was really inspiring was his choices to understand where he was going. So being able to learn from something, to say, I'm seeing all these people dying around me because they're overdosing, and this is not the life that I want. And making that choice on the spot and having the integrity to choose that. And the same thing with, he missed out on his other kid, and he was not going to make that same mistake again. And the integrity of those choices and his persistence and perseverance in doing those things. And that's how you're living your life. You are persistent, you're motivated, and you want to continue to have those positive influences and bring other people's positive influences to life for people who may not have heard of them.
Absolutely. And he also had that self-belief, which we all need. I mean, he honestly felt he could do it. And he's not worried about, I mean, Richard Branson in a similar type of way. I mean, Richard Branson has had so many companies that have failed, but we all know about Virgin Atlantic and Virgin Records and all those type of things and stuff. And Branson being this like billionaire celebrity character, you know, still goes up there in balloons and off to the, you know, into the moon and play up into space. No, but the thing is, he said one thing. He said, I don't mind if something fails as long as I'm okay putting the Virgin label on it. If it fails, that's fine. So he doesn't have any regrets. And I heard that as well from a guy I interviewed who used to be in the Icicle Works. He was telling me a story about a guy who was in Echo and the Bunnymen, wrote his memoirs, and somebody said to him, do you have any regrets? And he said, I don't really have any regrets. I just wish I'd have given myself enough time to enjoy it. Whereas David Bowie did do that by changing things, you know, even writing a song that was changes, you know. Right. There's an amazing program on Apple TV that a girl I know just told me about a few weeks ago, and I've watched all episodes. And it's called 1971, the year that music changed everything. And it's absolutely amazing because you look at things nowadays, it's kids march in the streets against guns and stuff now. In those days, it was like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young with the Kent State University, Fort Ed in Ohio. You know, even things like, you know, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, The Who, Won't Get Fooled Again, Lennon, all the singers were making statements, you know, like The Times They Are Changing, Bob Dylan. I mean, he didn't he didn't stop the Vietnam War, but he made kids aware. And I think when musicians come out, even Neil Young now just coming out in his late 70s about Josh Rogan and Spotify, he can do that because he makes more money from one gig than an entire year off Spotify. But they're so passionate about making statements because people, that's where we come back to that word influencers. They're in a position of responsibility where kids look up to them. And we do have the ones that abuse it, and they're the ones that really do make a difference in those people's lives because they're at that tender age where they can veer one way or the other. And that was kind of replaced by reality stars, you know. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Kardashians fan, you know. I don't know why.
No.
Yeah, I don't know why somebody whose father defended O.J. Simpson is a megastar. I really don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't get it either.
They're famous for being famous.
I am definitely very puzzled by all of that. But, you know, that again, it comes back to what can we do as people who think about these things and talk about these things to improve that for others and help them see that this is not their life and that they can be influenced by more positive things and to not go blindly by it. But I think that's all that we can do is have those tools.
But what you're doing with your podcast is you're bringing that to people. They need to go away, digest it, and put it into their own world, you know.
Absolutely.
And some of it will add up, and some of it won't, you know. But the thing is, I think, you know, and I don't think I'd find myself using these words, but there is an advantage in getting older because you do stop to think these things through, and you do have something to compare it to. And I always think, you know, I wish my mother was alive so I could just walk up to her and thank her for giving birth when she did, because I have no regrets for, you know, but having 3, you know, grandsons under the age of 10 and stuff, I worry about the world they're growing up in. And, you know, there's so much diversity and things that are out there that, you know, I mean, with when you reached out to me and I saw what you were doing, I mean, all I can do is turn up for what you want. And in what I'm doing in my little world, I'm trying to bring the message and what I learned from music. And because in my lessons learned from rock and roll ebooks, I'll be talking about, it's like the insights collection, insights into artist development, insights into communication, insights into interpersonal skills. But in the same way that lawyers have like case studies, I have my case studies where I can relate it to an experience an artist went through. And that will hopefully be a benefit, for a book and things. I think, you really, as you get older, I respect people who put something back, rather than people just collect vast amounts of money and then try and screw people out of more money. I mean, if you start something, I mean, you saw the furore over Olivia Newton-John dying. To exist 30 years with what she had and to make, women with breast cancer feel people cared is an incredible achievement,
She definitely left an incredible legacy.
Without a doubt. And it'll still be there. And she did it because she believed in it. She didn't do it to make money or be famous or, she had her legacy with Grease and the whole thing and everything. But no, she was a firsthand, sufferer of something like that. Incredible to think she lasted as she did. But she didn't think at 42, I've got breast cancer. Why me? She just got up and did something about it. And she got another 30 years. And now, so many people just were so heart-wrenched when they found out that she'd passed away. She was only 73, but she did something with her life. She didn't think.
She did. So, Tony, for our listeners, and I will have all these links in the blog post associated with this podcast. The show notes are going to be on elkinsconsulting.com along with this podcast episode. Tony, what do you want people to know about your work that's coming out and that's out?
I have a book that only just came out. The irony of that was it was due to come out the back end of last year, but I put it back because the publishing company had some other music books. And then I had knee replacement surgery, which is terribly rock and roll. So I kind of have laid up for about 4 months with my legs tucked under the desk, so I kind of brought it out. And ironically enough, I mean, two of the major things that I talk about in the book are U2, because I worked with them right from the very beginning, and David Bowie. And on June the 19th, it was the 50th anniversary of Ziggy Stardust. And on June the 5th, it was the 39th anniversary of Red Rock. So they're major events in rock that just happen to have coincided with my book. So I have my book, which is, I think it's inspirational in as much as it's just a kid from the north of England growing up and showing his appreciation for the path that life led him, And then, like I say, I do a podcast which is called Moments That Rock and Roll, where people are sharing things that happened in their life, and they become incredibly inspiring because, like I said to you before, the premise being that if I'm listening to somebody telling their story and I like it, then why wouldn't other people like it? So I have the ability to share that through the power of podcasts and things. I do a radio show, which is just trying to turn people onto music. That's more just a hobby for a friend, and I've done it before. And I really want to spend my time kind of reading and writing. But now we're doing like the Facebook Reels that I want to be doing and stuff. I'll be kind of seducing people in the nicest possible way into kind of luring them into my world, so they get a little bit curious and want to find out a little bit more. And it sounds a little cliched, but if one of those people can just go and discover David Bowie as a result of it and get something out of it, then I've kind of done my bit. And I do feel that being able to just go and, because with those Facebook Reel things, you can come out of it as a when I say a personality, I don't mean a desire to be famous. I mean somebody who's a real person that just happens to be conveying stories that they otherwise wouldn't have heard. And it makes those artists real, not just like, rock stars. I mean, rock stars is such a trendy term nowadays.
No, but it helps people see the multi-dimensions of a person that they may only see one side of. So I could definitely appreciate that.
And I try and simplify it like those from my own. And funny enough, I mean, I wanted to kind of write a book on my own quotations, because I found myself reading things like stuff like, old enough to remember, young enough to dream, and I wrote something during the course of the book that if you believe it enough, it won't be hard to convince others. So they're they're motivational things that kind of just come out of my mouth without even thinking, because it's kind of like what happened to me. I was fortunate enough to be around real influencers who impacted me, and I never forgot the things that they did. And I always say to people that the easiest artists to work with are the biggest, because they know it's not all about them.
That's cool. Well,
they're not
Tony,
late. They don't turn up wasted or anything like that, and they don't become obnoxious and this and that and everything. So, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry if I'd veered off into the abyss at times, but, I'm not going to change that.
No. This has been these days.
Yeah. But you see, even like now, we wouldn't have come together for this if a friend hadn't have put me in touch with Dennis. Dennis had the ability to introduce me to all the right people. So all of a sudden, we're in each other's world now. And that's about like the ability to, to connect with people and communicate, not just to have as many friends as you have or get as many likes as you were saying and stuff, but just to find people that you can relate to, that you can, hopefully we've both learned a little bit out of this that we've shared with others as well.
Absolutely.
But, I'm not trying to be anything that I'm not. So if somebody thinks, my God, he doesn't half prattle on, then so be it. Probably the same on the next podcast.
Well, I definitely have learned that not everyone is my audience. So I hear that. Tony, this has been such a pleasure. I really appreciate your time and your energy while we've been recording this. Thank you.
My pleasure indeed. And thank you very much for the invitation, Sarah. Onwards and upwards, madame.
Thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. I'm putting some finishing touches on a new course, Get the Offer, Job Interview Storytelling, that will be available online in early fall 2022. It is so important that this course is truly relevant, helpful, and useful for my clients. So I'd love your help. Would you please email me at sarah@elkinsconsulting.com or complete the form that's linked on the blog post associated with this podcast episode to add your ideas for the course? I'd love to know your biggest challenges when it comes to job interviews, so the content of my online course is exactly what you need. I appreciate your help. Thanks in advance.